One of the things that made the books of Kings so difficult to follow at times was the fact that after the kingdom split into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, suddenly there were two sets of storylines to follow, there were two thrones to keep track of, and as well as that, so many of the kings' names were similar to each other that at times it was tricky to keep these various timelines straight in our own minds. Well, that problem is somewhat simplified in the book of Chronicles. You'll remember that after that split in the nation, the northern kingdom was only ever led by evil, godless kings, until eventually the Assyrian Empire swept in, destroyed them all, deported many of them, and then filled the land with foreign people, and that was the settled fate of the northern kingdom. What happened to the southern kingdom? Well, they fared a little bit better, didn't they? They had some evil kings and some good kings, but their kings were always from the line of David. Well, as you know, eventually they too were exiled. They were exiled by the Babylonian Empire and taken off into captivity, but they were eventually released from captivity and allowed to go back and resettle their land. At which point the chronicler picks up his pen and writes his history of the people of God, so that those in his own generation might be able to remember all that has come before their day and age. That's what we're in right now, the history that was written then. Helpfully, for our purposes, this chronicler has no interest in recording for us all that went on up in the northern kingdom. They are largely irrelevant to them, and they were scattered by the Assyrians, and they never did come back into that territory. So he only records for us what went on in the southern kingdom, which becomes known as Judah. Why is that? Is that a bit of snootiness, superiority, snobbiness about the spiritually unclean northerners? Well, not exactly. Remember, Chronicles is history plus theology, and the writer here is supremely interested in one person, the descendant of David who will save the world, which is why he so closely and exclusively follows the family tree of David. He's not bothered about what goes on up north, because there is no possibility of the Messiah coming from up there. The Messiah will be a descendant of David, and so it is David's line that is so carefully followed. So, David is the father of Solomon. In the previous chapter, Solomon went to glory, and his son, Rehoboam, became king. Now, we've talked already about the split in the kingdom and what happened up north versus what happened down south, but this is the chapter where that split actually takes place. And here is how it happened. It seems that it's shortly after the coronation ceremony itself where the new king, Rehoboam, is asked a question by a man called Jeroboam, bit confusing. He's asked, "Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labour and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you." Rehoboam answered, "Come back to me in 3 days." So the people went away. Now, the new king, Rehoboam, asks the advice of two sets of people. His father's advisors, experienced, mature, thoughtful leaders of the people, and also his mates who grew up with him. The experienced advisors recommend giving a gentle answer and being kind to the people, but the foolish friends of Rehoboam recommend exactly the opposite. Which advice does Rehoboam take? Well, you know, don't you? He takes the foolish advice. Here's a question though, why? Why did he take that advice? What appealed to him? Well, I think the answer has to be, in his great pride, he perceived that he would forever live in the shadow of the great King Solomon, and he wanted glory for himself. Solomon built the temple of the Lord. Solomon is the most spectacular king that Israel ever knew. Solomon is referenced in the New Testament as a man who lived in stunning splendor. And so now Solomon's son says, "If I ease up on taxing you, my treasury will never be as full and my life will never be as flamboyant. And so for my sake, I will lay a heavy burden upon you." Just see how this son displays the opposite kind of leadership to the Lord Jesus Christ. Rehoboam boasts about how shockingly heavy his burden will be, whereas our King, King Jesus, says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Rehoboam wanted to serve himself. Jesus came not to serve himself, but to serve others, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Well, the consequences of Jesus' generosity are that he draws people to himself. And we, in our right minds, we love him, we serve him, we are glad to submit to him. But look at the consequences for this foolish king in our chapter. It's exactly the opposite. He doesn't draw people to him, he drives people from him. His actions do not unite the people, they divide the people. They cannot rejoice in their king, and so they rebel against him. This was one of the most foolish actions that any king has ever taken. The consequences of this are spiritually unspeakably atrocious. All that David did in his long and glorious reign, all that Solomon did in his spectacular, eternally significant reign, all of it is undone, all of it is fractured in 3 foolish days. Well, aren't you glad that Jesus is your king?